Good morning. I'm Carly Kaiser. I lead the JP Morgan Innovation Economy commercial banking team based here in Seattle. And it is an absolute delight to see you all, so thank you for spending your morning with us. I have the pleasure of getting to talk to Jordan Tigani this morning, who's CEO of MotherDuck. I think probably one of our more visible leaders here in the Northwest, so hopefully some of you have heard him speak before, but getting the opportunity to kind of dig in a little bit more into his philosophy around the changing world of data and how we're going to analyze it and access it and all of that kind of stuff. So maybe actually to start, would you give a little bit of your background and kind of how MotherDuck became?
Sure, yeah. So I've been sort of a big company, small company kind of person, throughout my career. Worked at Microsoft for a long time, worked at Google for a long time, but always sort of had the startup-y bug. But I never thought I really had it, what was in it to be a founder. A couple of times I LARPed at it. It'd be cool to do this, and then you just feel like you're playing. And so this time, I actually just got fired from my job. I was the chief product officer at Single Store, and I was like, what am I going to do? And I kind of was thinking, well, I should just hack on something for a while. And so I was like, this DuckDB database is amazing. Nobody's really heard of it yet. It was, several years ago. And I'm like, somebody should really build a cloud service out of this. And I'm like, well, hey, I've built 2 cloud data analytics services. I helped start Google BigQuery, and then I helped get Single Store's SaaS service up and running and turn it into a business. And I'm like, hey, maybe this should be me. And so I just started, I think I got about 2 days into it, and I got introduced to, Hannes and Mark, the founders of the open source project. They're like, hey, we'd love to partner with you. And then somebody said, hey, you should talk to my friend. He invested in my company. He will give you some feedback on the idea. And I talked to him for about 15 minutes, and he's like, yeah, it's a good idea. I want to fund it. And, and ever since then, we were sort of off and running. And, it turns out, I ended up becoming a founder, and it's been an amazing journey. It's been almost 4 years since then, but it's been. I think it's like having kids. It's not every day is fun, but it's certainly rewarding.
I love that. So in 2023, you wrote kind of a blog post that got a lot of attention about the death of big data, and then recently you've kind of updated maybe that perspective based off of a lot of what MotherDuck is doing around kind of how the modern data stack is evolving. Given the amount of capital that has been raised against this big data kind of problem that we've been tackling for the last decade, what do you see on the horizon for the next kind of handful of years around this category?
Well, so I think until a few months ago, the conventional wisdom among data people was I know AI is changing everything in software engineering, and it's kind of this huge disruptive force that's coming in, but it's not going to affect us. And here's all the reasons why it's not going to affect us. And in fact, I used to get on stages like this and say, here's why text to SQL is never gonna be great. Here's why this what everybody's talking about is going to be harder than expected. And then the next generation of tools came out, the next generation of models came out in December. And then all of a sudden it was well, actually this just works. And I think there was a couple of reasons that we were thinking about things wrong. But I think we all of a sudden went from this isn't going to impact us to hey, this just works. And then within about 15 minutes of playing with Claude, and not even Claude Code, and the ability to just sort of ask questions about data, I'm like, hey, wow, when I ask it about my revenue and it plots this graph, this is actually a better graph than the BI tool that we use. It's better graph than any BI tool I've ever seen. And I can also do a lot more interesting things, and I can I don't have to bang my head against the wall to figure out how to get the metric or the thing that I want. I just ask it. And it's wow, this is going to change everything in the data world. And so I think that the modern data stack, which is kind of typically aligned around a set of swim lanes, you ingest your data, you transform your data, you analyze your data, and you visualize it. I think those are all sort of blurring. I mean, you can see how the Snowflake, Databricks, et cetera, are kind of saying, hey, we're going to build a BI tool, we're going to build the ingestion. Fivetran and DBT are merging. So there's been a lot of coalescing of the market, but I think that even predates AI. I think AI is just going to sort of rapidly accelerate it, and and I think then it becomes like it's super hard to know what shakes out. But I think as a founder of a software company, and I think it's a hugely exciting time because nobody knows what's going to happen. I think you look at a year ago, you felt like, hey, I kind of know what's going to happen. This is going to happen and this is going to happen, and it's sort of a relatively sleepy part of the of technology. And now it's like, oh my God, like all this stuff is new. Because if you look at data pipelines, those are highly vibe codable. Like you can, do you need Fivetran when you can just ask Claude to say, hey, pull data from the HubSpot API and like put it into my database. So I think there's lots of opportunity, lots of things. I think agents are going to kind of dramatically change how things work. But it's, I think times of great difficulty, I think, are also times of great opportunity, because it's like you get sort of pushed out of your comfort zone, and then you can recognize, well, hey, there are these adjacencies, or there are these things that I thought would never work, and now all of a sudden they work.
Well, and you guys are obviously investing quite heavily in AI into the top of the warehouse for MotherDuck. As somebody who used to lead product exclusively, now you are leading this organization. How are you guys thinking about product strategy, given all the uncertainty you just shared about? Like, how do you navigate that as a leader and as a company?
So one of our investors, Martin Casado, like he's kind of a legendary infrastructure investor, and he likes to say there's basically three phases of a company. There's the kind of the build phase, where it's all about product. Then there's the go-to-market phase, which is really all about like optimizing your sales and go-to-market, and like really making sure that you can scale that. Then there's the scale phase, where you just become a big company and you kind of try to make it much bigger. And I think we had progressed from the kind of the build and we're solidly in the sales phase. And I think AI shows up and it basically says, hey, if we continue just sort of like saying, how do we optimize what we're doing, then we're going to be toast. And then we had to really go back into kind of product mode and build mode and figure out, okay, what are the opportunities? And a lot of it was looking at sort of the adjacencies. I think there's one way of, a metaphor I like is, there were like these houses on a cliff, and like the tide came and they washed away the house on the cliff, which was, I think, BI. And now all of a sudden we have a waterfront view, which is awesome, except like we're also the next house for the tide to come and hit. So we kind of have to, you figure out what do you have to do to not get, washed away. But then also, how can you take advantage of this amazing waterfront view? And specifically, we were able to build this technology in a month, which we call Dives, which is, you start from Claude, and Claude uses our MCP server. You ask a bunch of questions, and then when it builds a visualization, which it's quite good at, then we just say, hey, can you save this in MotherDuck? So what the visualizations Claude usually, or ChatGPT or Gemini usually does is they have this drawback of the data is embedded, so it's static. And if you want to have a revenue dashboard that you keep looking at, well, it's never going to change. So you need something that will update it. And so what we did is we kind of built a tool that would replace the data with a live query and then host it on our website. And this turned out to be super powerful in being able to understand and allow people who typically wouldn't be writing queries, wouldn't be interacting directly with the database to get just so many things done. Like our sales team, our head of our customer success team, our support team, our engineers, like marketing, everybody is sort of building these things, and they're also kind of more than they're not just dashboards. They're actually full-blown data apps, and you can skin them, and they've been super interesting. So I think there's some product adjacencies that we can look at on kind of on that side, on the ingestion side, and then really as a product person, kind of the lens is like, well, just how do we make our customers' lives better? how do we make it kind of easier to do things that people already want to do? And then once you kind of focus from that level and even step back is like, what is the thing that people are actually trying to do? Well, people are trying to get insights about their business and using data. And so how do we help them do that better? And I think that just sort of opens up a bunch of new opportunities. At the same time, like, we have to make sure that the other stuff that we've been doing, the building an amazing data warehouse, also stays, that we don't lose focus of that and just like focus on the new shiny thing, because that's also a great recipe for falling on your face.
Well, that kind of transitions. You recently shared something you shared with your MotherDuck team in Slack, kind of about how you think about leveraging AI internally as a company. And maybe share with the audience a little bit about kind of what your perspective is on that. And then how are you guiding your team to both find the efficiency and not give up the creativity that kind of comes with that? Like, where are you asking people to find that balance?
So on one hand, like, AI is a huge way to like help accelerate the stuff that you can do. But one of the things I was seeing is a lot of people were sort of using AI as a substitute for actually thinking through a problem. And people would write an AI generated doc and they'd send it, and then you're reading through like these 8 pages of just sort of like AI generated slop, and you'd ask them about something and they wouldn't know, because they didn't, like, all they did was sort of like, they had like a 2-paragraph or a 1-paragraph prompt, and AI actually did the thing, or you'd kind of push back, and like they wouldn't be able to push back because it wasn't actually their thing. And so to me that's just it's laziness, intellectual laziness, especially if you're writing, if you're writing to communicate with somebody else. One of the ways that I write personally is I write to just help me understand my thinking about something. And I find if I don't write it down, my thinking has all sorts of jumps and gaps. And I'm like, oh, we should do A, and then A leads to B, and then B leads to C. And then you start writing it down, and like, actually there's no way to get from B to C directly, and you have to like, well, maybe it's, maybe you have to go through like B prime, or maybe actually it's not C at all, it's D. And so that process, I think, is extremely valuable, and it's one that kind of I'm pushing our team to do more and more. And it's not because I like writing and like I hate writing. I whenever I have to write something, I procrastinate, and I go and I surf the web and go get gummy bears and go like whatever I can to avoid writing. But like, because actually thinking about something is hard, and I think that's one of the things that as more and more stuff becomes AI driven, and as the sort of the cost of building goes to zero, I think the one thing that is going to be important is clarity of thought, and being able to sort of communicate clearly what you want, or what the problem is, or what the customer needs are. And I think that the only way to do that is by practice. And plus, it's just like, if you send somebody an AI generated thing, it's like from 3 bullet points, like you might as well have just sent them the 3 bullet points, because that's actually the information content that you've shared. At the same time, like for building things, AI has enabled us to move a lot faster. So I don't want to completely denigrate it, but I just think that there's a time and a place and a way to use AI, and AI can be an editor, can give you, can poke holes in your ideas. You can write something and have AI point out where you went from A to C without like having a clear path there. But just having AI design something for you, or write a doc, I think is laziness.
Well said. As somebody who works in a large corporation, I think that I share your sentiment. Given your current role at MotherDuck, as well as all of your experience at Google, how do you think about preparing now your data warehouse against all of kind of the agentic queries that are going to start to come at it? And how do you think about scale and all of those different things that are going to be a new world order, given what we're also creating?
So there was an interesting interview I saw the other day. It kind of went around the Twitter sphere, had Jeff Dean, who was one of the architect wizards at Google talking about, the impact, some of the impacts of agent-driven computation. And one of the things that he said was like, all of these tools that we're using, like the C compiler was an example, or designed for an age where like it was a human that was driving it. And so if a human is typing, make, if it takes the C compiler a second or two to start up, it's generally not a big deal. But an agent can run things so much faster than a human. So if it takes 2 seconds to start up, then that's actually a problem, and that's a big limiting factor in how much you can actually get done. So for data and analytics and dealing with your data, for a long time there's been like this sort of truism is like, well, latency doesn't really matter. It's throughput that matters. Like, hey, I'm trying to crunch this giant thing, and like the fact that I can do that in like a few seconds versus a few minutes is important. But if when things are being driven by agents, and agents are possible are able to run 100 queries per second, then, but if it takes 5 seconds or 500 milliseconds even to run that query, then you're really going to slow down the agent. So a data warehouse or an analytics engine that can run your queries in 10 milliseconds is going to be the one that works. And one of the nice things is we've sort of have built on top of DuckDB, and we've made a bunch of choices that mean that we can do super low latency. Like I think our median query is 6 milliseconds. Our 80th percentile is under 20 milliseconds. And so I think we're really in really good shape for this sort of agentic world, and like kind of architecture also means that every agent or every end user or every workload gets their own separate instance, so they're all isolated, and so you can have lots of agents all hammering things in parallel. But I think kind of the shape of the problems are changing with agents, and I think the shape of the systems that have been built over the last couple of decades are designed for the shape of the problems with humans. And I think some of that's is gonna change, and I think it's likely gonna change very quickly. And I think there's kind of a truism in software that like, yes, there's things change, but they change a lot slower than you expect. And I think you kind of throw all that out the window when you're dealing with AI. It's like some of these things are changing just so much faster than I ever would have thought. And like something, whereas just like 4 months ago, it was almost unthinkable that like, you could just ask questions to your database. Like I think internally at MotherDuck, I don't think any of us ever write SQL anymore. Like I used to be our #1 SQL writer, and now I just ask Claude, and it's so things change. Things are changing quickly, and that's what's exciting about it.
I have one more question, so just prepping you all so you can start to prepare your questions for Jordan. And the final question I had for you is, as you think, can you kind of walk through the trade-offs in your mind between data lakehouses and data warehouses in the world of AI, and maybe for the non-technical people in the audience, kind of help break those two apart in that answer?
Yeah, so I think traditional data warehouses, or traditional way people store their data is in the database, and I think which is great, but then your database owns it, and one of the things that people are wanting to do in the age of with AI, or even without AI, is they want to say, hey, well, I've got a bunch of different tools. I want them all to be able to access my data, and if it's locked up in my Snowflake instance or my Redshift instance or BigQuery, then that doesn't work. And so there's been the sort of this flowering of open data formats, Iceberg, Delta, Duck Lake, that are kind of making it easier to store your data elsewhere, and then you have a plurality of tools that actually can access that data. And I think as you're going to see more agentic tools, so that your agent can basically use whatever engine it wants, or whatever the best way to access the data is. I think we're going to, instead of having these things locked up in warehouses, they're going to be basically federated out, or they're basically centralized in, there are just Parquet files and some metadata that live somewhere on a data lake. But it also gives other tools access. So like if your data is locked up in Snowflake and you're like, I want to use MotherDuck, or I want to use BigQuery, I want to use something else, then it's this big migration project. Versus if it's an Iceberg, then we have the same. All these tools have the same level of access, and I think it's also going to cause a flowering of additional tools and additional ways to look at your data.
Opening it up to questions for Jordan.
Hi. So to me, obviously, the DuckDB, it's a huge momentum for MotherDuck. But for you, so over time, do you see that there's a line that you should be cautious about? How do you define the boundary between DuckDB being more popular and also MotherDuck still remain uniquely valuable?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think it's something that pretty much every kind of open source, commercial version of open source wrestles with, and I think to us is like there's value in having somebody run infrastructure for you. It's the same reason that running Postgres, RDS, Aurora, Neon, et cetera, is a multi-billion-dollar business. Is like, yeah, I could run Postgres on my own. It's this great open source project, but like it's also a lot easier if somebody else runs it for you. And I think particularly with analytics, analytics is kind of capable of using up really whatever resources you throw at it, and in doing so very fast. And so like you can either scale, if you can run DuckDB on your own, and you can run it on a giant machine to be able to run things at speed, but that also means you have to provision a giant machine, and analytics also tends to be very spiky. Or you can run it on something like MotherDuck, where you basically can do sort of real-time provisioning of much larger resources than you'd actually do. And I think particularly for running agents, like agents are probably not going to have tons of compute on their own and tons of memory on their own, and you might not want to devote that memory to buffer pools for your analytics. So it's just something that becomes really easy and makes a lot of sense to offload that to another service. And once you offload it to a service, then we can run that really well. But that's a good question. Thank you.
Kind of a follow-up to that question. So you kind of mentioned there is value in managed infrastructure, and I think larger enterprises are willing to pay for that ease and user friendliness. But I'm curious, like from MotherDuck's perspective, is there any kind of tipping point that you're seeing as customers are moving from DuckDB to MotherDuck's various products, and whether that's monitored internally, like from a threshold perspective of how customers engage with you guys?
Most of our customers are actually smaller businesses. Like we think we can provide a lot of value for companies that just they want some analytics, and they want somebody to run their they want a data warehouse. DuckDB is not on its own a data warehouse. It has no concept of users or permissions. It's very hard to sort of share things between customers, and yeah, you can kind of build some of the frameworks around it, and you can run caching servers, et cetera. But most of our customers just are like, hey, it's easier to have somebody else run it. If you're running things on your laptop, then that's you can run DuckDB on your laptop, but like very often you don't want to download all your data onto your laptop and sort of and do all that work. And if you're going to be hitting data that lives in the cloud, it's just much easier to use a cloud service, and it's almost irregardless of the sizes, and especially as things start to scale.
Hello. I haven't fully formulated this question, so I hope it comes out correctly. As someone who used to write a lot of SQL, who no longer writes any, if you had a crystal ball, could you talk about how the goodness of code is going to either crash where no programmers write code, or is it just going to continue to evolve? Like, it just seems like it's happening so fast. What happens when we no longer code?
I mean, that's a fantastic, philosophical question, but I think, throughout the history of computers, there has been a progression of higher levels of abstraction. I think, first, people would write on punch cards. It was like, this was, very, very little abstraction. You're kind of dealing with specific registers and memory, et cetera. There was assembly. There was really low-level programming languages like, Fortran and COBOL, and then you kind of C to then the managed languages, and kind of like there is, I think, a desire to add more levels of abstraction, just so that people can think about what is important for the problem they're trying to solve, versus like, how do I teach the computer how to do kind of every little thing. And I think AI is ushering in kind of the next step, where I really think actually the endpoint is where source code is just English, or whatever language you speak. It might be some sort of stylized version of English, but I think that's one of the interesting things about, I don't know if you've seen the kind of the OpenClaw project, and the way to add plugins to that, you don't add it in code, you add it in English descriptions of the thing that you want to add. And to me, that's just sort of fascinating, and it feels like that's the future to me. I was a software engineer writing, hands-on keyboard writing code for probably 15 years, and I love writing code. And every day that I'm not writing code, I sort of wish that I was, because like the boost you get from like, hey, this works, this is awesome, like, and like, it's just like this feedback loop is great, and like, people are so much harder to deal with and understand than code. I think for a certain type of introvert, maybe not everybody is the same, but so I do think that, like, probably programming, just like there are still assembly language programmers, like I think that I think there's still going to be a market for C programmers, but I think it's probably not going to be as many. Is that sad? Yes, it is, but it also means that like a lot more people are going to be able to write code and get stuff done and build things and get the same feedback of like, hey, I built this. This is cool. I want to do this, and so I think that value outweighs kind of the like, hey, like, I'm not going to be able to wrestle with in-memory data structures in the same way.
We're going to end it there. Thank you all so much. Jordan's here for a little while longer. The MotherDuck team is in some great shirts if you actually have questions too and want to continue this conversation. So thank you, Jordan.